There he is. Hi, Sanjay.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. I'm glad you made it, Sanjay. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Brandon, welcome everyone this evening. And Brandon, would you like to get us started with the Zoom COVID instructions?
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Brandon McGuire, Assistant City Manager. These are just our modified meeting procedures to make sure that we comply with the COVID-19 provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act. Board members and other participants must state their names and titles each time they speak. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom and in person. We must also state our names and titles each time we speak. All motions need to be stated clearly, and after a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on board members individually to provide their vote. The chair will then announce whether or not the motion carried, as well as a count of the vote. The agenda for the meeting provided instructions on how to submit public comment, and we did receive some correspondence for the public comment portion of the agenda, which is attached. The chair will also call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options, and staff will direct anybody attending in person to the podium to speak following social distance protocols. I want to remind everybody to please mute themselves when they are not speaking, and just another reminder to remember to state your name and your affiliation before you speak.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. We'll go ahead and begin with the agenda, and we'll begin with A, approving the minutes. I hope you all had a chance to read the minutes, and do we have a motion?
Jane Gibson, board member. I move we approve the minutes, but I would like to make a correction.
Yes, go ahead and proceed, Jane.
It says at the bottom that I asked for a policy update, and what I asked for was an update, a policy analysis update, and maybe this is the same thing, but I wanted to be clear that what I was looking for was an update from the staff on the analysis of our ordinance, looking for things we missed, gaps, problems, contradictions, things that we didn't get right. So I just wanted to be clear that policy analysis maybe doesn't describe exactly what I had in mind. And I noticed that it's not on this agenda, so I hope it'll be on the next one.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I did understand the request as you've described it, Jane, and we do have just a brief agenda item for me to just provide that status update on when the board can expect to receive that from the staff. And that would just be the first agenda item.
Oh, I see. Thank you, Brandon. Somehow I didn't see that.
And I'm seconding it, that we approve the minutes.
Okay, and so to be specific, before we proceed, I recognize the motion, the edit, and the second by Sanjay. That was item number 2 on the minutes that you wanted to amend or edit, Jane.
This is Jane Gibson, board
Jane,
member.
go ahead.
This is Jane Gibson, board member. I'll withdraw that. I see here on this agenda under number 1 that Brandon or whoever wrote the agenda fully understood what I had in mind.
Okay, all right. So we're moving back to the first motion of approving the minutes. You're declining the edit with that motion, and there is a second by member Sanjay. Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor with yay, all those opposed nay. We'll start with Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member, yay.
Littleton.
Stephanie Littleton, board member, yes.
Mishra, board member Mishra.
Board member Sanjay Mishra, yes.
Board member Salvini, yes. And board member Taylor.
Board member Marie Taylor, yes.
Okay. We've got 5 votes. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, let's go ahead and move to public comments. Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and address that?
Sure, this is board member Stephanie.
Thank you.
There is one attachment, if I understand, Brandon, to our agenda that was added today. And I'm going to actually defer to board member Jane Gibson to kind of speak to concerns spoken in this, if she would.
This
Jane.
is board member Jane Gibson. I'm certain others can also speak to this if they would like to. As I understand it, if I'm interpreting this email correctly from Jayhawks88, there is a concern on the part of this person that the summaries that we produced seem to signal a bias on the part of those of us who produced them, that they seem to be weighted in particular ways. The example given here is that one paragraph is dedicated to those who oppose the question and 1.5 pages to those who support it. So I'd like to respond to that because this illustrates a limitation of this kind of research. And so I would like to explain why the amount of space given to a particular point of view is not relevant. When you have a self-selected sample, well, a self-selected sample just means that you send out this general invitation to anybody and everybody that would like to participate in the study, and they decide for themselves if they want to participate. And what you often see, and in fact in this survey we see it clearly, is that people who feel strongly one way or another tend to participate. They tend to sign up. And so we see in the survey Likert scales what Sanjay correctly described as a bimodal distribution, meaning that you have these extremes on either end. People either strongly, they think something is either very important or very unimportant, or they strongly agree or strongly disagree, but not so much in the middle. And what that means is, exactly what I was just saying, and that is that people who took the survey did so because they felt strongly one way or another. But what that means also is that the survey is representative only of those people who took it. And so we can't say, if we had 200 people take it and 150 said that the CPRB is just what this community needs, that would not mean, and 50 people said it's a waste of resources, that would not mean that 75% of Lawrence thinks that the CPRB is just what we need, and that 25% disagrees, that thinks it's a waste of resources. All it means is that there is one opinion out there that says that we are what the community needs, that the board is what the community needs, and another one opinion out there that says that it is a waste of resources. We can't count them as quantitative data because they aren't representative of the community. They're only representative of the people who took the survey. So, and that's the reason why it doesn't actually matter if you have only one paragraph on one point of view and a page and a half on another. I mean, each one of us did this a little bit differently. I mean, there are a lot of similarities, and all of them are perfectly legitimate ways to present the data. Some people copied all of the responses into the document. Some of us synthesized those and presented only the themes themselves rather than repeating the same theme in, with different language as different people articulated it. So there were different ways to do it, but all those are fine. And all that we can say is that we have these opinions. We can't say we have a majority opinion or a minority opinion, because these are not quantitative data, right? These are a self-selected sample of people who felt strongly one way or another. So every kind of answer, every theme that might have been articulated by, many of the people in the sample or just by a few, still just counts as one. Okay, I hope that's clear. Anybody else, please help add in, clarify. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has this kind of research background.
Sure, I see Board Member Mishra, then Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So I agree with everything that Jane has said, and a good way to interpret the results would be to predicate it of those who responded. And so you know that this is not Lawrence. This is of those that responded. 80% said CPRB is not good. That's fine. Of those who responded, 20% said this is great. That's fine. So if we put that predicate clause up there, I think everything should fall in place. The other thing I think the email seems to be asking, and there we can decide how best to do it, is to give them the information. And I would think it's fair to give them all the information. You want all the things, you just copy and paste it at the end and let other people make their own judgments. Thank you.
Board Member Taylor?
So first, Board Member Marie Taylor, first I want to echo what you've already said. I think Jane also did a great job of explaining this when we were first taking on the task of looking at this report. Anyone can look at all the results. They can produce their own PDF and do their own analysis. So that said, I just want to clarify how we respond to public comment generally, because there's rules about that for public meeting purposes. So I think in this instance, the comment is on point for an item that's already on the agenda, but generally we don't have to respond back to comments. And so if Brandon can kind of clarify that, because I think that's just a general point about how we conduct the meetings, and don't feel like we have to respond to every public comment, because I don't think that technically we can if it's not on the agenda as an item to discuss.
Thank you, Marie. Brandon, would you want to briefly speak to that?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, I'm happy to. And thank you for referring back to the disclaimer on the agenda regarding the protocol for public comment. You are correct, Board Member Taylor, that as a general practice, the board will not discuss or debate items of public comment. I will say, though, your point is well taken that this particular communication probably would have been better suited for that one agenda item. And usually we would have done that. I think it was just an oversight in attaching it to this one instead of that agenda item. So I apologize for that, but thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, thank you for both points, that our responsibility to public comment as well as where that might be more appropriate. So thank you very much. Okay, any other public, any folks who are on or in the room for public comment? Brandon?
City Manager Brandon McGuire. Madam Chair, we do have one member of the public, it looks like, in attendance. It's just a name that I do not recognize. Jeremy, did you join us with the intent of providing public comment this evening?
No, not necessarily. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to confirm that. I didn't want to assume. And we do not have anybody in attendance in person this evening at this point.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Then we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item, or C, the agenda items, and item number 1, an update on the draft ordinance analysis.
Yes. Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Just a quick update following the request from the last meeting last month on the review that city staff is conducting of the draft ordinance. And I based on Board Member Gibson's comments at the beginning of the meeting, it did confirm that we are on target for the sort of analysis and feedback that the board is looking for. And that's really looking at what are some of the potential, I guess, blind spots, so to speak, things where there could be laws or policies or contracts that would maybe we would need to deconflict the ordinance in its form, or do some policy change or something to that effect to reconcile any sort of discrepancies between the draft ordinance in its current state and some of those blind spots. And I don't mean that term offensively to the board members, just to suggest that it's a technical analysis for a level of detail that the board members may not necessarily have based on their profession. So We have been working on that. The city attorney's office, the city manager's office, and Captain McKinley and Lieutenant Ernst. We have been working on that together. I will say that we have received the mid-project briefing, executive briefing for the Citygate report, the Citygate consultants who are conducting the comprehensive analysis of the police department. And we expect to receive the first draft of the report sometime around late May. And so at this point, in that report, in the presentation, they actually spent quite a bit of time discussing the police review board and systems of accountability in the complaint process. And so it's staff's preference to wait until we have at least the draft report to provide the feedback from staff of our analysis of the ordinance, just to give the board the full context. And I think that full context will be very helpful, as well as having the objective review of the process that the board has gone through. So that's the status update. So at this point, we would expect to come back. It would most likely, I guess, be at the meeting in June to review that.
Okay, any comments or questions? Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor. Brandon, can you confirm that the Citygate team also looked through the survey results and took that into consideration in drafting their report, or whatever stage they're at right now?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. Yes, they did. They were following along with the survey, and they were taking note of the comments and the feedback. I did explain to them, same as I did with the board, that this is one of the more popular survey, or larger survey responses we've gotten. So it's definitely worth looking at. Their feedback to me was that they appreciated the comments. It provided quite a bit of insight. And one observation that they provided, and I don't think that they would mind me sharing this as kind of an early observation, was that there was a lot, sort of as Dr. Gibson said, a lot in favor of and a lot not in favor of. And so that was definitely a theme. So to the extent that informs any sort of technical recommendations, I will leave that to the consultants to explain. But it is something that they did pay attention to, yes. And if I may, they also, they conducted not a comprehensive, but a fairly large scale public engagement process. And we did have 2 general public meetings, which some of the board members were able to attend. Those were not very highly attended by members of the public. And really in review, the optimistic interpretation of that is that we provided more appropriate spaces for people to engage in the listening sessions that were not open to the public. One of the takeaways from this engagement process is when we're talking about public safety and law enforcement and interactions with law enforcement, we're asking for people to be extremely vulnerable. And so I think that having the kind of the large come all, everybody welcome, and the media is welcome, and the elected officials are welcome, that sort of forum, I think may have kind of had a chilling effect on people's willingness to really come and contribute. And so that being said, the consultants were in several dozen listening sessions and engaged with well over 100 individuals, and I think it's quite a few more than that, really. So we do feel pretty good about that, and there will be yet another round of broader public engagement once the report is received.
Hey, this is Chair Salvini. Thank you, Brandon. Any other comments or questions? Board Member Mishra?
This is unrelated to Citygate, but related to some data we are collecting. Do we have any idea about the study conducted by the professors from Boston about police stops?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I'll refer that, and you're referring to the disproportional minority contact study for traffic stops. I might ask Captain McKinley to provide kind of a status update on that. Sorry to put you on the spot, Trent.
Sorry,
No
sorry, once you started talking about Citygate, that came to mind.
Yes.
Not a problem at all. This is Captain Trent McKinley with the Lawrence Police Department. I have been attending some regular meetings with that group. As you may be aware, and not to belabor this, but due to COVID, there was not as many traffic stops and contacts as we traditionally have. And for that reason, the people that were analyzing that believed that the data set was not large enough to be valuable to their study. They had apparently a target number in mind that we were nowhere near. So there were some discussions with the county who also helped fund that study. And in those discussions, they decided that they would extend that study out. It is my understanding that that study will go through the end of the year, and they will then report out on the full analysis of those stops.
Captain McKinley, this is Assistant City Manager Brandon Ware. Do you know, are they planning on presenting the findings to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council?
They are. As part of their contract, they had discussed the ability to have several public meetings. They can do it in person. They can do it via Zoom. The CJCC was a forum that they said that they would speak to, but with the city and county funding this, they also mentioned the willingness to present both at the City Commission and at the County Commission.
Very good. Thank you so much, Captain McKinley. And I'm sorry, I meant to recognize you at the beginning of the meeting, but thank you so much for being here and responding to that.
No problem at all.
Okay, any other comments? Yeah, thanks. Any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, let's go ahead and move to agenda item number 2. And now I do have a question about that. I could be, is there a reason for the asterisks beside 1 and 2?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. That just indicates that there was an agenda update. And so we added materials. There was one that we missed with the original posting of the agenda last week.
I got it. Thanks. I've never paid attention to that before. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we'll start with item number 2, discussion of Lawrence Listen survey responses. So I guess I really would like to get some feedback from the group on how we want to move forward through item number 2. And then even more importantly, what do we do with the information going forward? The floor is open. Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. My preference is for us to trust that we've all read the 7 survey responses that are posted there on the agenda, and that we focus our energy on thinking about what information is provided through these survey responses that can help us improve the ordinance.
Right. And thank you. That very succinctly moves to what our purpose is in having this information. And that is, it was an opportunity to really think about, open to the public to have feedback, hopefully on how we can improve the ordinance based on feedback from citizens. So I agree with you. Does everyone feel comfortable moving forward in that manner? Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I agree. I think we saw a lot of, there was some good information and ideas that we could use later on to develop policy reviews. I thought that that's very valuable. So maybe we should think of this as a resource for us as we think of other projects that we would need to look into.
To consider. Mm-hmm.
To consider, right. And that it's interesting to see the polarity within the results. So, and I really think that the survey tool did what we thought it would do, which was to create a public forum as if we had had a town hall meeting where everyone gets to express their views. So it is what it is. I thought maybe one way to approach this, and we can discuss it, is to go back to look at our ordinance that we have, the draft, and just go by section and see if there's anything that we think should be changed, modified, clarified, that sort of as a possible way of narrowing down our discussion.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Marie. Board Member Gibson?
Board Member Jane Gibson. I think going by way of the ordinance is maybe the back door of what would be the most efficient way to get at what the responses have to say to us.
Right,
And so
logistically,
to me, it would
right.
be more practical to go through the responses themselves rather than go to the ordinance.
Okay. So would there be any proposals on how to logistically then proceed with that? Board Member Taylor?
I'm Board Member Marie Taylor. I'm fine with Jane's suggestion. I think that works as well.
Okay. Very good. Board Member Gibson, then Board Member Misha.
Jane Gibson, board member. Just in response to your question about how logistically to handle it, we assigned responsibility for each question to board members. So those people who took on the responsibility for those could speak to what they see as being salient, and anybody who read them and thought there was something to add, those maybe that's the way we could figure out what's of value in each one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Jenny took number 1, and I believe Stephanie is going to speak for Jenny on that one. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yeah, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, and I'm going to, seek obviously some feedback from you all that have read it, because I did speak shortly with Jenny and I have some ideas, but I don't know that I have a full grasp of the best as I've looked back through the ordinance as well. So I have some thoughts, but yeah, we can just start with one and just kind of work through. I think that's the best.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead.
Go ahead.
Let's go ahead and proceed then and start with 1.
Okay.
Board Member Littleton.
Okay, this board member, Stephanie Littleton. So I'm just going to kind of repeat the question so we can just kind of look at it from the big picture. What other responsibilities, this is question 1, what other responsibilities, if any, should the CPRB undertake to promote positive and fair community police relations in Lawrence? The way Jenny has summarized this, kind of some of the big pockets is LPD training, hiring, policy procedures, and then some breakdowns on gathering and presenting data and informing, used to inform policy suggestions. And then there's some additionals. But I kind of want to kind of just start off by talking about, as I was looking at our ordinance, about the training, hiring, and how we have that in there. And what we have is somewhat generic, because obviously the responses, the feedback we received is pretty involved. But one of the things that Jenny really emphasized, and I think we've heard quite a bit about this, about alternative policing and such, is the informing the LPD on the policies. One of them at the top of the list she has under that is develop protocol regarding people experiencing mental health crisis and or houselessness. I know that all of us don't have, mental health probably training. I mean, I don't know that I know everybody doesn't have it on this board, but that's not necessarily our forte. But we can certainly make recommendations, right? That's something that's in our ordinance that speaks to that as far as policy is making recommendations. So I'm throwing out some food for thought there, I guess, to talk about, looking at one of the top things she was emphasizing. Do we want to consider some from this question, some of the policy from number 1 for the health crisis? Any thoughts on that?
Board Member Gibson?
I don't mean to dominate this discussion, so, but I did give that a little bit of thought. I think I can't say strongly enough how important I think it is that we help the LPD, or that somebody help the LPD with people who have mental health issues. I mean, I think that that's a huge issue. It's a lot to expect a police officer to handle, since they also are not necessarily trained in mental health crises or how to handle those. So it seems to me that Jenny's right, that this is a real key issue. I guess I'm concerned, though, that this would not be something that our board would really have the experience or knowledge to do. I could see that this would be a really important initiative for the police to work with Bert Nash maybe, or some other mental health specialist to come up with some protocols that would help the police and help people who are in mental health crises. I just don't know that our board is the place for that.
Jane, thank you. This is Chair Salvini, and when I'm thinking about that too, I'm thinking you're exactly right. And there's some other initiatives that are happening in the community too, in looking at mental health issues and certainly the criminalization of mental health in our community. So there are several different initiatives that are mindful of this. And I think, and Captain McKinley, you might be able to speak to this, but I think law enforcement's also involved with some of these community groups that are addressing some of these issues. I know that there's some crossover services through former Officer Hadel, for example. And would you like to speak to that just for a minute so we can have think about how we might want to frame that in the ordinance? Yeah.
Sure. This is Captain Trent McKinley with the Police Department. We've been looking at this for about 10 years. And as crisis intervention team training came on the radar with us at about that time, we started to look to that. And Chief Khatib had a goal of getting the vast majority, if not 100% of our officers through the 40-hour crisis intervention team training, which was really not something that was much heard of. Instead, you had specialized officers in many departments, and those officers went out on those types of calls. But really what he wanted to do is spread that training across the entire department. So at the academy level, we have 8 hours of mental health first aid training that is provided by Bert Nash Mental Health. And then that's followed up later, within a couple of years of an officer getting experienced out there on the street. Then we bring them back through and finish out that 40-hour training in crisis intervention team training. The other thing we do is, as you touched on, Tanya, is Susan Hadel is a master's level clinician with Bert Nash Mental Health, and she joined. Yep, she joined the co-responder program, which was initiated in 2017. So we have an officer that's paired with Susan Hadel from Bert Nash, and they respond to those mental health calls. They also do follow-up in the field on calls that may have occurred during times that they were not on duty. So that's an ongoing thing for us. It's something that's very valued by our department, and certainly it's needed. We also have Lieutenant Halstead, who is very much in touch with Bert Nash with their homeless outreach team. There's lots of discussions, as you touched on, with the crisis center that's being built. We've had coordinated discussion with Bert Nash, with Heartland, with a number of other agencies that are participating in that, so that we can kind of have a rounded community discussion and kind of decide the best approach overall.
Sure. Well, thank you. I know, peripherally some of these things are happening. I'm not as engaged there. So what that does for me as a board member and focusing on thinking about the ordinance, I'm going to recommend to my colleagues here that maybe with regard to training, at least, and perhaps folding into the policies, would be bullet number 1, bullet number 3 would be, how can the review board answer to ourselves as citizens and the greater citizen folks that we may be representing. Guarantee and review and stay informed, and then also work with law enforcement to make public what kind of training are they receiving, and what's the standard, what's the gold standard for training with regard to the particular demographics that we have in our community and the particular issues that we have in our community, and how well does your training match those? In other words, making sure that your training isn't over here and disconnected from our citizenry, and making sure that they're best practices too. I'm just throwing that out there to maybe somehow address that in the ordinance.
Trent McKinley with the police department. I'm not sure I can answer succinctly exactly what you're saying there, but certainly being part of these community conversations that involve multiple agencies and multiple stakeholders, many of these discussions are public, so there certainly is an opportunity to be involved in that, and certainly asking questions, even if it's outside these types of meetings, of what we're doing and what we're working on, or coming and wanting to be a part of watching some of those trainings. Things like that. That is something that certainly is welcomed. As it pertains to the crisis intervention team training, that's not just for our law enforcement officers here in Lawrence. That we also bring our dispatchers into that. We bring other agencies into that, both as role players and as participants. So again, we're trying to make sure that this isn't a narrow focused type of program and approach. I think Tanya may have frozen.
Yes, looks like.
Go ahead,
I will
Sanjay.
wait for permission. I
Yeah,
will wait for permission.
Go ahead, Sanjay.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. So my point on mental health was there's some debate and discussion that the role of the police should be separated from the mental health. One is law issues and the other is social issues. And that's a recommendation that we can make, but that is a broader city level decision that the commission has to get into, because I can share that at the University of Kansas PSO stuff, students and constituents clearly said that when it is a mental health issue, I don't want a policeman at my door. I want a social service person at my door.
Jane, go ahead.
Jane Gibson, board member. I would just not want us to get bogged down on this, because I don't see that this is something for us to put into the ordinance. I certainly understand what Tanya is saying about what we do with this. And it seems to me maybe this falls into that box that Marie mentioned earlier, of those things that we would want to deal with later on. Like, in what respects would we want to be, would we want to know more about how the police department is addressing the issues of mental health. And it sounds to me like you've done an enormous amount, Captain McKinley. You've moved in all those directions for 10 years. I don't think that maybe the police don't always know when they go out on a call that there's a mental health problem on site. So I appreciate very much that you're training across the board, as your Chief Khatib had suggested that you do it. So I guess I want to say we probably should hold this idea so that it's something that we can explore as a question for better understanding on our part, and perhaps consideration for any policy recommendations that we might want to make later on. Not that I would presume to know what those policy recommendations might be, but it seems that that's what this is. So I guess I would suggest that we move on.
I would agree too, real quickly. And what I want to add to that is that the issue in and of itself that our role is to promote, work with law enforcement and be knowledgeable enough to promote positive and fair community police relations in Lawrence. And then that could be the ordinance, kind of like our own policy. And then what are the ways in which we can examine this list to say, these are our priorities. These are things that are important based on all of our perspectives, and certainly the community's perspective from the feedback, that we focus on maybe assisting, making our plan, if you will, of what we're going to do to promote that. Does that sound reasonable? And then Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, and I guess this is why I wanted to start by refocusing our attention to the ordinance itself, because we got a lot of great feedback from people, and I would say most of it was very thoughtful, and I could tell that they had read the ordinance. And so, but I think it was also an opportunity for people to express their opinions and their concerns about policing in the community generally. So, but we knew that, and that was actually good, because I think it provided an outlet for people a way to have a line of communication. So we got more than we maybe needed for our specific task of looking at the ordinance that had certain sort of parameters. And even the comments that said there should be no board at all.
Yes.
But the board exists. It's part of the local law, so that was not the question.
We could write an ordinance to write ourselves out, right?
But that wasn't that wasn't our task. But that's okay.
Absolutely.
That feedback is also valuable in having this dialogue that we set out to have. So I think as we go through these comments, we have to think about what is actually within our ability to change in that ordinance that's structural to the ordinance, not structural to how policing is completely done.
Well, you bring up a really good.
So,
absolutely.
But what it does do is it does point to policy recommendations or inquiries that we could make that we may find important to make, but the current ordinance allows us that ability too. So I put that in that bucket of things that when we develop a work plan on policy initiatives, and it could be policy initiatives that are sparked by what Citygate also presents. So it's going to be hard to manage this role of what's ours and what's Citygate's and what's for the city commission to decide. So as long as we kind of keep all these balls at play, I think we'll be fine. But again, this is all part of the process.
Yeah, right. So I'm wondering also at this point too, if we want to, I want to take a moment to thank you all for such good work, and thank especially Jane Gibson for helping me out. I've been having a rough few weeks, and I want to thank you very much, Jane and Stephanie, for assuring that my absence in this process still gets covered. So I really want to thank you for that. And I'm wondering if we don't want to consider thinking about, because everyone works so hard on putting the exercising to put the summary and the information together, but now take a step back and approach with the lens of the ordinance. And is there anything, come through the work that you've done and come through and see if there's any additional or different that we need to consider in the ordinance. Okay, like what would be an action item that might support that part of the ordinance, or what literally is significant enough to take another examination at whatever section that is in the ordinance. Does that make sense? And I guess what I'm suggesting too is maybe I should do that work since I was absent. Oh. Yes, Marie, and then Stephanie.
Board Member Marie Taylor, aren't we still going through each question? Yes. So I think is the decision now to move on to question 2?
Yeah, this is Board Member Stephanie Littleton. I do have a good point to go possibly to the ordinance from question 1. So, but I want to thank Captain McKinley and Tanya as well. I really appreciate the breadth of what you explained, because there was some of that I didn't even understand, as some of us probably don't, to what engagement with crisis intervention training and such that's going on. So that was very helpful. So let's move forward and try to keep moving on to Marie's point. So on question 1, there's a gather and present data and use to inform policy suggestions. One of the things that Jenny and I talked about out of this section of her question is, the importance of us needing to figure out what we can share annually. And we've kind of talked about this, and underneath this section, she has down a response was provide an annual report summarizing CPRB's activities, categorizing the complaints or inquiries received, and reporting on their status and outcomes. Well, there's a couple of things in here, right? We already have an annual report that's reported out in July on the CPRB. So we do have that, but what we don't have is the categorization of the complaints or inquiries received. And all that kind of comes back together with what Jenny and I talked about is what can we share annually and how do we want to incorporate that possibly? I think that's an important missing out of the ordinance that I thought at some point, and somebody helped remind me, I thought we talked about adding that in as a consideration for an annual report as well, with the city or the PD reporting that out so we could utilize that for our communications in our public engagement. But I don't see that in the revised ordinance. So maybe we just talked about that. Everybody's looking like they're blank stares.
I know we did talk about certainly writing more of a review or an annual review ourselves. In that, I don't remember the complaint piece. I know we were talking about it, but I think we were struggling with how is it that we get that data without, violating
The PII.
I don't know how we get the complaint data, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So this board member, Stephanie Littleton, I know we talked about it. For some reason, I thought that maybe we had put it in the ordinance, but I don't see it. But we had talked about, because I know that Lieutenant Ernst, whomever puts that together, provides it to the city manager. And it is minus the PI, the personal identifiable information, and it's really a short summary, if you will. And if we could get that information or some form of fashion, we could utilize that as well. So that was some conversation.
I see some. Sure. Let's go with Board Member Mishra and Board Member Gibson.
Okay. So I know we have Board Member Sanjay Mishra. We have had this discussion, and I think if I remember, we said annual report, let's leave it open in terms of the contents, what you want to put, where you want to put it. Plus the categorization of complaints, my question would be, do we recategorization what the police department has done, or we go by what their categorization is? Because the police department puts out a report, right, to the city of the complaints received. So what happens? Are we duplicating effort? But
sure.
In terms of our approach, I'm all for, we should be answerable to the community. So we should say something about the complaints received and handled. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Gibson.
Member Jane Gibson, under 12504A8, number 8, it says that one of our duties is to report to the governing body from time to time regarding its activities. That's our activities, including an annual report to be presented to the governing body at the first regularly scheduled meeting of the governing body following July 31st of each year. That there's nothing here that says what must be included or what cannot be included. It's open, as I think is appropriate. If we want to make this a report that has this kind of information, of course, always respecting confidentiality, then this would be the moment to do that. I think given the fact that we've never received or seen a single complaint or investigation, that we're not really in a position to predict exactly what kind of information we would like to report. But this number 8 does not prevent us from including what we think is appropriate, so long as we don't violate confidentiality.
Agreed, and that's when this could be helpful in terms of recommendations. Board Member Taylor?
Sorry, I was moving my cursor. Okay, Marie Taylor, board member. So we did discuss something similar under section, let me go through, it's the section, I want to say it's 12504 under section G. When we talked, it says, and I'm hoping I'm reading the correct version, but it said at the conclusion of its review, the board shall, during an open meeting, direct a member or members to draft for public release to the public a summary of the community member complaint as well as its disposition. And then we can't include personal identifiable information or any information that's violates law to disclose. Are we talking? So I think, is that in the version you're looking at, Jane? Because I think that we've handled that.
Yeah, both of these are Jane Gibson, board member, sorry. Both number 8 and under G, both of those allow us. In fact, G requires us to address the issues of complaints. It just doesn't specify what kind of information we'll report out so long as we do not violate confidentiality. So I think that it's handled. That's what I think.
Okay, Stephanie, how do we want to proceed then with 1? Are there any other items?
I just, first, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, I want to clarify because I'm wondering, several of us were kind of trying to figure out if we had the right, the most final revised copy of the ordinance. The one I have dated is 7/26 of 2020. Does anyone know what, Brandon may know, what the most updated revision?
This is Assistant City Manager Brendan McGuire. Yes, in hindsight, we should have put a link to the most recent version as part of this agenda package. I apologize for not doing that. Sometimes we work in the iCompass system so much that we sort of take this for granted. So, and Stephanie and Tanya, we didn't have a chance to review the agenda before posting, so I apologize. I would refer everyone to the January 1st, 2021 meeting, which is easily accessible in the agenda website, the iCompass website. I can also, you know what? I will also post a link directly to that in the chat. So those attending the Zoom meeting can just click that link and that will take you to it.
Appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you.
Yeah.
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I don't believe I have, I thought I had the most updated, but I don't think so.
Yes, and that was, the board had made, my recollection of that meeting was the board had made a couple of just minor grammatical changes in the December meeting. And so then we brought that ordinance back just to confirm that that was the draft. And so I don't believe there was any discussion on that meeting about the ordinance.
Board member Marie Taylor, that's the one I was reading from.
So this board member, Stephanie Littleton. So Marie, going back to your point out at number 8, 2504 under 8, the report to the governing body.
She's
No.
talking about G, Stephanie.
Oh,
8 is under A, go down to G. This is Jane Gibson, board member, sorry.
okay. Okay, all right, thank you. So So are we good? Everybody's good on this one, on this point? Okay, so we're gonna move on.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna move on because I have a
Do you
couple
want
of,
to go ahead and,
yeah, I have a couple more.
sure,
points.
and you're going to do number 2 too?
No, sorry, Tanya, I have a couple more points on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I'm just gonna, a couple of things I wanted to draw out of this question one. One is other CPRB suggested responsibilities, meet regularly with the police union to listen, not just to advise. I think that's a really good thought. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be in the ordinance, but I thought I'd just kind of draw that out and see if there's any thoughts from the board. Board member Jane Gibson.
Jane Gibson, board member. I like this idea a lot. I don't feel like we have very much opportunity for feedback from the police department on the mental health issue. For instance, it would be really great to hear from law enforcement officers how they experience mental health crises in the field, and how effective they feel like the training is. I'm not suggesting that we do the research on the law enforcement officers, but that kind of feedback would be really helpful, I think. And in this case, listening to what I don't know why it's the police union is maybe that's the only body in which the police officers speak, but if that's the case, I would be very interested to hear their feedback and how they're experiencing their profession, their encounters with the community, what they see their own needs are. I'm not sure how willing they would be to share all of that with us, but, and this is a little bit like our inviting ourselves to their party, but it would be very helpful, I think, to us to hear what they have to say.
Board member Taylor? And
Board member Marie Taylor. So the union is a private association. So I don't know how I think we should hold this as a question to ask the city attorney whether they design, there's any, I think it's in that list of Jane's questions about there's any issues with the way that we've drafted the ordinance, and in that review that they're doing, if we could add that question in to meet with a private association with collective bargaining power as part of it, just to specifically require us to meet with them in the ordinance. There's nothing that's stopping us now. They can, and I think they could come to the meetings too and participate in that. So I think of the ordinance as something that if we write it broad enough, it won't prohibit any of these actions, not that, which is very different than saying it requires us to do this. And so if we want to change it to require, we should just run that by the city attorney's office.
board members, Mishra?
I think she was calling my name. No. So, board member Sanjay Mishra. So
Yes.
I agree with Jane and Marie, and I am all for getting as much feedback from as many constituents as possible. So we hear everybody's viewpoint, but also to Marie's point, we are not in the collective bargaining business. That's a entirely separate issue. But to hear concerns or issues from the other side is, I am all for it. Thank you.
So there is one thing I completely agree with, and it's the review board should not be involved in the investigation process. I think we all can agree with that, right? Yeah, I want to make a comment on what you said earlier, Marie, and that is that clearly folks took some time and really read the ordinance and did some good work, and that increases certainly the value of their responses. Stephanie, go ahead with any others that you wanted to address.
Sure, this is board member Stephanie Littleton. That's going to be the last one to address. Sorry, this one took so long, but to Marie's point, I don't think that any of us, I don't think particularly that we want to make this a requirement per se to meet with the police union. That's just a great opportunity that makes sense that we keep it broad enough that we certainly can do that. And that's something we should consider in the near future. So I'm done with one. Thanks.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and, Board Member Jane.
Jane Gibson, I just want to say, yeah, I agree that it shouldn't be made a requirement, but because, yeah, for all the reasons that you've given, I don't need to repeat that. But Tanya, you just threw out this statement that we all agree that we should not be involved in the investigations, and I would like to hold that for a discussion.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
I have a very unstable,
Perfect timing.
Internet.
Fill in the blank.
All right. Well, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, I'm going to take over, and Sanjay, I do have it down that you have a question too. So we're going to move on to Sanjay, if you would, please.
So I think when I read through the responses, I tried to bring out representative responses for the 4 categories that I broke the responses into. One was questioning the training of CPRB, that we are not up to snuff to do oversight. The other one was it's not necessary because there's no problem. If it ain't broke, don't go there. The third was it adds transparency. And the 4th category I pulled out was it builds oversight and accountability for the police department. And I put the sample responses in there. As far as I am concerned, I think our ordinance covers these issues. If you have any questions or you interpreted things any differently, I am willing to provide. Yeah. Stephanie, you need to take over. Jane has a question.
Sorry, this board member, Stephanie Littleton. Jane, go ahead.
Board member Jane Gibson.
back, sorry.
Shoot, Sanjay, and now I forgot what Sanjay was just saying. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I put the 4 categories up and then I said, I don't think there's any change.
I got it. Thank you. Board member Gibson again. It was about the training issue. I think Stephanie might bring this up under number 3, but it has to do with our training, because this was a theme that showed up in other questions as well, that we're not prepared to. I mean, a number of people thought we do investigations, which we don't do, but there were people who thought that we were really not prepared even to review the investigation file. So Stephanie, do you intend to bring up that training issue under number 3? I'll just stop now if you do.
Yeah, this is board member Stephanie Littleton. Yeah, and that'll be a great segue when we're ready to move forward. That I have some specifics for the ordinance to consider. Yeah.
Otherwise, I was going to make a quick point to this is I look at the CPRB board as a citizens board. We cannot have a trained board. We cannot, every city, every board, if it looks for experts, city cannot afford it. But otherwise also, our justice system runs on citizens. If you go to a jury trial, they don't understand the medical terms. They don't understand the police terms. They don't understand anything, but they look at it from a citizen's perspective. That is what is more critical. So I have my bias. I disregard all that, which says that the CPRB is not trained to look at it. As a citizen, I have the right.
Okay, how do we proceed forward here? Board member Jane.
Jane Gibson, board member. Here, Sanjay, well said. I just, I'm wondering if this doesn't suggest, that we're all engaged in this learning process, and that as OPA produces its investigative files, in the same way that an attorney in a courtroom must explain things to the jury, the citizen jury, I wonder if we might, gradually learn how, OPA does things in the language that they use, and they might also learn, where we're weak and we need things better explained to us. I mean, that seems to me an organic learning process that we should expect to go through here. And I appreciate what you said, Sanjay. Thank you.
Board member
Stephanie,
Marie.
and then, yeah, Taylor.
Board member Marie Taylor. So I find that analogy useful, but only to a certain extent, because we are not a jury in this process. We review, we are advisory. Even as we've proposed revisions to this ordinance, it is only in a review capacity. We have no personnel decision-making authority. It all still rests with the city. It still all rests with the chief and the city manager. And so what we are doing is just providing some accountability for those who are serving the public. And so I just don't want it to, and it seemed that way with some of the survey responses, that they thought we had way more power than we do, or even intend to have. We are just, we are like neighborhood watch. We're just eyes on the street.
Agree, Marie. Oh, sorry.
Yes, Sanjay.
Thank you. Sanjay Mishra, board member. Absolutely agree, Marie. All I'm trying to say is as a citizen, you have the capacity to say if this was fairly done or unfairly done. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Any other wrap up to do? And I apologize for losing my internet there. Jane?
Board member Jane Gibson. There is an issue here on question 2 under transparency that comes up under a number of other questions as well. And that is that the view that someone outside of the police department should always be reviewing these complaints. I mean, as if we just set aside the practical matter of whether or not the city wants to pay for an outside consultant or an outside investigator always to investigate the complaints so that the OPA does not do it, then we would have a discussion about whether or not we think it's appropriate for, at least within the, I don't know if it's our ordinance or not, but if it's appropriate for OPA to do the investigations of citizen or community member complaints. They're not, I shouldn't say citizen, because we have lots of people who are not always citizens, community member complaints. So I think that there is a discussion to be had around who investigates at the moment, given, I mean, just as a practical matter, I'm content to say that OPA should do this is my view only, that OPA should continue to do its investigations. But there were people who wrote things about that I hadn't really given a lot of thought to. There were two concerns, and on the one hand was that the CPRB would simply become a rubber stamp for OPA, that we wouldn't be able to critically examine those files, maybe because we don't know enough, or because I don't know, maybe we're not a very good board, we're lazy or something. I don't know what all the scenarios might be, but that's one point of view is that we might become one worry about that is that we might become a rubber stamp, and the other side of that is that that OPA might be incentivized to, I guess, hide information, to I don't know, to gloss over various complaints, and that's why an outside investigator might be required to do that. But from my point of view, I think OPA needs to continue those investigations. And this is one of those things that later on, if we ever did see that we had some issues, that's something I think that we could address later. No ordinance is ever, written in stone for in perpetuity. Everything can be adjusted as it needs to be. And so I guess this is my answer to all those people that said, and it is just my answer, all those people who said that we should not endorse OPAs investigating community member complaints, that I think that we should endorse OPAs doing community member complaints until we have a reason to do otherwise. Because we are not in a position to do investigations. We're not ourselves. And anyway, that's just my view.
Okay. Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Murray Taylor. So we discussed this early on about various kinds of ways you could structure an oversight review board. And some of them are civilians and they're paid and they're an oversight board. Some cities do it that way. Other cities have OPAs, other cities have completely independent review agencies. And so whether I agree or not, structurally, we have an OPA system in the city. So if our charge was to look at how the review board fit into that process, I'm not sure that our ordinance could do what's being requested by some of the survey respondents. But it is something that perhaps Citygate then can look at and give recommendations on how you would do an overhaul or restructuring to best practices.
Good.
Yeah, I like that, Marie. And I would say, who has oversight to review OPA and their effectiveness? And I'm guessing, I know we've heard on the presentation on how complaints come in and how they're handled through personnel and human resources. And there is some oversight through the city, but I don't want to get in the weeds here, but I concur with what you're saying. And I like what you also said along with Jane, that our ordinance does need to be defined enough to have a role and a place, but broad enough to be able to fill in some of the feedback and some ideas from the feedback that can support us in what we're supposed to be doing. So do we want to move on to number 3? Or are we still on 2?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, I think Sanjay had said his particular. I think we're ready for 3.
Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and go with that then.
So all well said. So sorry, Tanya, go ahead with since that's mine. But yeah, well said by Jane and Marie. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing, all the analysis that the city has done as we try to move forward with what all we have done here. But on number 3, I'm going to look at this ordinance. So under, I get the section, 2506, under qualifications, going down to the training. I just want to point out on the ordinance, kind of where we're at, that we are to complete racial or other bias-based police training within 6 months, which we all have done. Complete coma, which we have done. And then it speaks to receiving additional training as directed by the city manager or designee to include, but not limited to, police use of force, which we've received. It speaks to de-escalation, which I don't recall us receiving that training. And then training to ensure the board's understanding of the police department's current complaint and investigation procedures. I just wanted to point out, it's pretty broad per se with some specifics in here, but from what the overall of what we received back from the engagement survey, it really speaks to that we need more training and as a board. And this is going to be my opinion, my suggestion with what I read from all the wonderful feedback we've received is that either one, we be required and it be explicit on our ordinance that we are required to attend a Citizens Academy, or since I know that's not been held for the last year or 2, and if that's not being conducted, that we are required to attend certain courses, if you will, in the police academy. And I think, that would encompass so many different areas of suggested training that would be best suited for our board. And we can talk more about those particulars, but that would be coming back from this excellent feedback. I think that's the one thing that stands out to me that we're kind of missing.
Okay.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the ordinance, it says this, but not limited to, but just making recommendations for topics. And I see question number 3, really providing some good feedback on, possible training options to consider that the board can consider going forward. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
In a second, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, a second piece, my thought with the board training is, one, the initial, right, when you come onto the board, the explicit, what you are required to do and what trainings to take. And also on an annual basis, if we don't keep up with like continuing education with what the police department is being trained on, obviously going back to what's fitting for our board, then we're going to be remiss in not keeping up with that piece of it too. So I think we should consider 2 parts of it. One is initially on the board, and then maybe looking at an annual for some type of CE of what maybe they're being rolled out to the PD. Board member Jane Gibson.
Board member Jane Gibson, I think that's a great idea. I like the continuing education idea. I'm not sure, we might need to hear from staff, and we probably need to hear from Captain McKinley as well about the, I guess what the constraints are on training. At this point, the way that the ordinance reads, only the city manager initiates the kind of training, the additional kinds of training we might get. It doesn't say we can't ask, but we might want to say that the board could also request additional kinds of training just to make sure that we're not precluded from that. I don't know if that's just overkill or not. Maybe that's just too much in the weeds. But I like the idea that we would have continuing education so that we know how the police are being trained. And I think the Citizens Academy is great, but my understanding, Captain McKinley, correct me here, is that it wasn't held or something. So I mean, can you speak to the kinds of training that along those lines that the board could get?
Yes, this is Trent McKinley with the police department. I'd tell you, ideally, the Citizens Academy would be great. It's been several years since we've put on a Citizens Academy, in large part due to our low staffing numbers. So the group that put on the Citizens Academy is our training unit. Our training unit is also the one that runs the back-to-back police academies. It used to be that we ran one of those a year, and now we're running at least 2 and trying to insert an experienced hiring process, if you will, to onboard employees. So it's been very difficult. We've even had to move additional staff into that unit just to keep up with hiring people. Now that's the reason, but it's not to say that we can't or won't have a Citizens Academy back up and running at some point in the future. As for a curriculum that might be most appropriate for you all to attend, I think that's probably something that we're going to need to develop and work into our training programs. Much of what we have to do as far as training topics is mandated by the state. So, for example, to attend firearms training, things like that, they're of course required of us. That may or may not be something that the board has interest in. So I think it would be something that we would need to probably, in consultation with you, find out what type of training you would like some exposure to. We could look at where that falls on our calendar and or move some of those things in and out of our calendar so that that can be accommodated.
All right, thank you. Shall we go ahead and move on to number 4 then?
Can we, Jane Gibson, board member, can we hear from Stephanie
Sure.
Stephanie, does that, do you think that will meet our needs to be properly trained to do our jobs? Or Stephanie, did you have something else in mind?
This board member, Stephanie Littleton, you were, so I'm trying to follow you, Jane, back to what Captain McKinley's saying as far as coming together on what training we want, or?
Well, he's left it pretty open here, that they would work with us to, to help us get what we think we need, but this does not, that would not then affect the ordinance. And I wondered if that was sufficient in your mind, or do we need to look at the ordinance to see if there's something we need to add there?
Yeah, okay. So I think twofold here. I think, and once again, this is my suggestion based on all the feedback that's received, because it's reiterated over and over again. Every member of the CPRB should be required a certain number of training hours with the police academy or citizens academy, and they speak to that we need more in support of what we're trying to do to support the citizens, right? So I think that it needs to be explicit in the ordinance that we, whatever we decide that is, if that's to be, if it's a citizens academy that we attend, or if we have to attend X amount of hours, maybe we don't want to get too specific and keep it broad, but get police academy training. But I think it needs to be explicit in the ordinance, so that is a requirement that we're receiving that training. And then we can build, I like the idea of the meeting of the minds and talking about what are those trainings look like that we think would benefit us. But I think that it should be explicit in the ordinance.
So Jane Gibson, board member, Stephanie, should we put this to the staff and ask if they can think about how to build that in? Or maybe some of you, I see Marie has her hand up, maybe Marie has some thoughts about all of that.
Marie?
Marie Taylor, board member. This is already addressed in the revised version of the ordinance. We've written it broad enough to have this flexibility on a year-to-year basis to decide what training should be appropriate. It's delegated to the city manager to make the decision.
Number 5. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's already in there. And not only that, we've added some accountability because we've put it into the reporting requirement that we identify what topics of training we have received. And so that if this comes up, we're held accountable to the public if they see that we're not having this kind of training. On the Citizens Academy, I think it's a shame that we don't have that anymore. And I think that the city should divert some money for that, to fund that, because other cities have that, and it is a great tool to build community police relations, and that's a deficit then if we don't have that. And so that would be an ideal way of training us as well as the public. And so other cities, when I looked at their ordinances, that was a requirement that their review committee attend citizens academies. Of course, that presumes that they're not going to cancel them.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Board member Gibson, and then Littleton.
Jane Gibson, board member. No, I think we're all agreed that we want this training, Marie. I'm not arguing that we don't want it. I'm arguing, and I think that the issue, and I'm looking at the revised version 2 of the ordinance, it only authorizes the city manager to direct. I guess it would be the police department to provide us with additional training. I think for me, that's the issue, is do we have the ability through the ordinance to request additional training, and the ordinance doesn't invite that. The ordinance only says that the city manager can do it.
Or designee.
Well, that's the designee is
assumed city manager, or is designee by
it could be the police chief, I think. I don't know. No, I guess the city manager could designate somebody else, but that would not likely be us.
Okay. All right. Board member Taylor, then Littleton. Oops.
I think it was Littleton first, and then.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, this board member, Stephanie Littleton. I do have some disagreement with the revision of the ordinance and what it does say. It is very broad. Some of that is good, but I still think that knowing that most of us, or not most of us, but some of us on this board that have been on for 2.5 years, we have been asking for additional training. we've asked for the Citizens Academy and or some training through the Police Academy. And I totally understand, and I know that Captain McKinley and Lieutenant Ernst have spoken several times on about the low staffing. I think that's very understandable in that respect. But I think we're simply asking, and now we're at a deficit because we're 2.5 years into this. And the citizens have spoken on this survey once again about the lack thereof of what we have not received to do what we're trying to do, or they feel that way anyway. And I would be in agreement on some of that, such as the de-escalation. There's other things that would behoove us to have the training on. And I think if we don't put something explicit in here, then we're back to it's broad, and it can be at the liberty of whenever that becomes available. And is that going to be how many years down the road? And I'm not meaning to be negative about it, but we are at a deficit right now. And I think, you know, I have read many of, as Marie has, you know, through Nicole, looking at all the other models. And I think most, if not all of them, but most of them do have it in there that you attend the Citizens Academy. And there's really, you know, good reasons for that. So I go back to, I don't think that our ordinance supports it enough.
Could we ask Marie, this is Jane Gibson, could we ask Marie, since you are the legal expert among us, could you tell us whether or not this provision under number 5 is sufficient to allow us to initiate, I don't know, maybe a conversation or a request for additional training? Is this enough?
So I'm not the legal advisor for the board, but this Marie Taylor.
You are. Tonight you're it.
I think, hold on a second.
Time's up.
Sorry, that was my son sending me repetitive email. Okay, so Marie Taylor, board member. So I think what we're going to have to ask this question to the city attorney's office as our list of questions for the policy review. A couple of things, because within this, we are an advisory board, so I don't know how much authority we have to demand training of any city staff person or police department staff. So I think that we are constrained with what the city manager, who's directly responsible, and then would have to be held accountable for the lack of training that we were to receive, right? So we have to ask them like how we could revise this to have us to have more control over that demanding of training if we feel like we're lacking it. Of course, we can ask for training, but then it's the receiving of the training and the funding for that training where you feel the friction. So I would love to write right into this a requirement that we have a Citizens Academy training and see what happens. See if it becomes an unfunded mandate, if you know what I mean. But we do that. And then they can just tell us, then if it's in there, well, they have to provide us the training. And they have to find a way to fund it. So that's just my opinion. Jane's like
maneuver.
No, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. I like, you know, we all regret the unfunded mandates because they're great symbolic gestures that don't take us anywhere. I would just add, I appreciate Captain McKinley's suggestion that we might work together to think about, you know, what kinds of training we need, and if they then could maybe develop some of that training for us. But that suggests to me again, you know, thinking back about whether or not we have the ability to listen to the police union in some fashion, that we need more input from the police on, you know, on the work that they do. And this is an example of that. We need the help of the police department to help train us, you know, to teach us what we need to know so that we can do a respectable job here.
Board member Marie.
So I have board member Marie Taylor. I have an idea for the police department. They could offer a very short course, virtual version of a police academy with some just a few topics and have it last a day or two. And maybe that would be helpful for the public to also have the opportunity to participate. Now that we've moved more into virtual, maybe that could be a cost-effective measure to provide some sort of type of citizens academy.
Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. To move us on, I wonder if we could, for the moment, I mean, I have a running list. I hope the rest of you do too. But for the moment, could we table this question and agree that we would go to the staff to ask about how to adjust the ordinance? And maybe we would even have another conversation about the unfunded mandate, about putting the Citizens Academy in there. But it's on my list, and I hope it's on your list, and so that we don't lose this, because I think we all agree that we need the training. I think Captain McKinley agrees we need training. And so do many of the people who took our survey think that we need more training. So let's move on. If you all would agree to table this, but hold on to it so that it doesn't get lost. And thank you, Stephanie, for bringing this to our attention, Stephanie, because this is really important.
Absolutely. Can it be noted, Brandon, in the minutes somehow to put kind of a mark there to return back to this?
Assistant Manager Brandon McGuire, yes, I'm taking notes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to question 4.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Question 4 is mine. This is Jane Gibson, board member. There it is. Okay. Let's see. This question is, how important is it for community members to be able to submit confidential complaints about the Lawrence Police Department directly to the CPRB? Well, I wrote in my summary document what was wrong with the question, and it had a lot wrong with it, and so we got a lot of answers that were not very helpful to us, but we also got some helpful answers on this. I'm just going to cut right to the chase about what came out of these answers that I think we might want to think about as and there's not a whole lot that I think speaks to the needs of the ordinance, I guess I would say. And one was about the fact that our ordinance doesn't overcome fear of the police or citizen retaliation against complainants. And those retaliation, the thinking of the person who wrote that was that the complainants, or that those who want to retaliate, could be members of the community or members of the police, and it could be against members of the community and members of the police. And that's not something that I think we had really contemplated. I certainly hadn't. But so it raised the question of whistleblowers, but that, and so for a minute I was thinking, well, is that something that we could even contemplate as being within our purview? And I think the answer to that is a clear and resounding no, it can't be. But because we don't do investigations, and I assume that there are some mechanisms in place for the police department to handle if there are whistleblowers within. But I'd be interested to hear what the rest of you have to say about that. And then I have just one other issue that I'll raise from question 4.
Jane, it's looking like we don't have any questions, comments, or anything otherwise.
All right, then I'll just move on, because
okay.
I didn't think we would, that was within the scope of what we can do, but I wanted to raise it. Okay, because somebody else did. All right, so that leaves the only other issue that I thought was really especially helpful in the ordinance, and it's just a question here. It's about the confusion of many of the people who responded to our survey of confidentiality with anonymity, because those are not the same things, but people seem to have thought that they were. And so a number of people were saying things like, it's great that we have this opportunity to have confidential, meaning anonymous complaints, but because that means that people who would otherwise be really intimidated and would never come forward can have a place that they can come with, in some sense of security and safety. And again, no retaliation and no blowback of any kind. But that also means there's no investigation, because, anonymity means you don't know who it is. You don't know anything about the complaint except that somebody's making it. And of course, the other side of that coin is that those complaints then could just be fraudulent. They could just be inventions, and it's impossible to investigate a complaint that doesn't have a name on it. Nevertheless, because there are real concerns about people who won't come forward because they're afraid of retaliation from the police or retaliation from other community members, I thought I would just ask the question of the board: is there any good reason you can think of to allow any occasion for an anonymous complaint? Or are those just ruled out altogether?
Board Member Taylor, Board Member Littleton next.
Okay, so Board Member Marie Taylor, I don't think they fit into the system because I think part of just any kind of system that deals with accusations in the United States does not allow for like anonymous accusations that cannot, where you like, it's the idea of confronting the person or the witness who's making the complaints. I think that's just integral to the system. So I don't think you can have something be completely anonymous. Confidential is different.
Board Member Littleton.
Yeah, this board member, Stephanie Littleton, well said by Marie, anonymous, there's no fairness in that, and there's nothing to support it. So that would not be something we'd want to consider.
Captain McKinley.
Just to jump in real quick, the Lawrence Police Department does accept anonymous complaints. And we do that for good reason, because if the complaint is specific enough, even if we don't know who's making it, and we have material things that we can go follow up on and prove or disprove ourselves, that information is still valuable to us. Albeit it is better to have somebody that you can identify, follow up with, and ask, pertinent questions to. But we have thus far chosen to accept anonymous complaints, just for background.
Thank you. Thank you for providing that to us. Board Member Gibson.
Board Member Jane Gibson. Well, then Captain McKinley, does that mean that you think that if people submit directly to us, that we should accept anonymous complaints and turn them over to you?
This is Captain Trent McKinley. I think in order to be consistent with the policy on whether we as a city and as a police department should or should not accept anonymous complaints, I think that, yes, I think that should happen. I think if you're able to have an interaction with that person who's making that complaint, just pointing out that it needs to be very specific, have some things that potentially we can follow up on. There are so many things anymore in our world of law enforcement with GPS on our cars and cameras in the cars, cameras on our bodies, calls that are all logged, that even without the specifics from that person, i.e. their name, we still have things that we can follow up on.
Does this implicate the ordinance in any way, Jane Gibson, board member? Or, I mean, if people want to submit them and we take them, I guess we don't need to change the ordinance in any way, do we?
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. The definition of a complaint in the current ordinance is any community member's expression of dissatisfaction with the law enforcement action, however presented. And I don't, just, scanning through it right now, I don't see anything that prohibits anonymous submission.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Captain McKinley. This is Jane Gibson, board member. I would just say we should leave that alone, and if we get them, we can turn them over to OPA. But I, for one, with Marie, and I don't think they fit very well. I don't think they help us as much as they could. On the other hand, I recognize that it's conceivable that people are afraid to file complaints if they have to put their names on them. So there it is.
Right. Jane, do you want to go ahead and continue on question 4?
I'm done
May I
with 4.
quickly-
Thank you.
You're done with
sorry.
4?
Sanjay wants something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sanjay.
I just wanted to endorse what Captain McKinley said is, given the advancement in technology, today you don't need somebody to identify who they are. If they say 12:31, I interacted with an officer, there's a quite chance that they will be able to nail the officer and they will be able to figure out the interaction, what the interaction was. So anonymous may also work.
Well, see, Sanjay, you find that reassuring. I find that just terrifying.
Do you find it terrifying?
That's the world we have to live in now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to go into okay. Do anything else on question 4? Okay, if not, let's go on to the next one, please.
Question 5.
Well, we have more feedback from Bill. Did on 2 number 4s?
No, not really.
Okay. We'll go on to number 5.
I think I also did 5, didn't
I believe you did.
Board member Marie Taylor, the files, the file names aren't
Different, right?
just
For Bill and Jane, I noticed that. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go on to number 5. I think the one that the one that we were looking at for Jane was the right one. It was the first one that said Jane in the agenda. However, the file was named incorrectly.
5 is Bill's.
No. Bill didn't do 5. Bill did 4.
I have Bill assigned to 5,
I know.
but maybe he did 4.
It was just some confusion about the numbering system, Sanjay. It's nothing. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go on with 5. Thank you, Jane.
Okay, this is Jane Gibson, board member. On number 5, the question on number 5 is how fair is the proposed complaint review process? And so the setup for the question laid out, what we do in that complaint review process, and our responses were really interesting. And it was when I did number 5 that I had a new appreciation for the thoughtful responses that we got from community members who took the survey. Because we had some people who said that the review process is too expensive, that it's inefficient, that it's unnecessary, it's a duplication of work, and it's, we shouldn't be engaged in all of that. But then we had some people who said, yep, it's just fine, and others who said it doesn't go far enough. So it was a really interesting, to me, it was a really interesting question, because people really thought about it in a number of different ways and came up with some fairly nuanced responses. And some of those I thought might have some implications for the ordinance. So here are the areas that I thought we might consider. And we raised this one already about the concerns about, these are different concerns about that third-party investigator. In our process, when we get back a re-investigated file, because we asked for more information and we believe that that investigation has not been sufficient to resolve the complaint, we have the option to ask the city manager to hire a third-party investigator. So people were concerned about that partly that they didn't feel that they knew enough about that process of hiring, of selecting the third-party investigator. They wanted to know how that investigator's, I guess, authority would be conferred. And I assume that would be by the city manager who would hire that person. They wanted to know if the findings of this third-party investigator would be binding in any way. And then they said, without fleshing out this process now, there's no way to be confident this option of last resort is something to put our faith in. So I guess the way that might influence the ordinance is whether or not we think that that is still a viable step that we should take, an important step that we should take. There were some who thought that by taking the investigation back to OPA, that was just an inefficient waste of resources. But I think I went and I reread the entire process again and thought through, and I think that it's necessary that OPA be asked to pursue additional information when we feel like the investigation wasn't sufficient. And then that means that I guess the last resort for the board, if we feel like the investigation is still in need of some assistance, is the city manager. So we still have these concerns about the third-party investigator. And so some people wanted to see more specificity about that, but I don't know that that belongs in the ordinance. But people want to know what that third-party investigator means. Who would it be? Would it be a group of people? Would it be one person? How would that person be selected, and by whom, and with what qualifications? And so anyway, for a lot of people, that third-party investigator was kind of a black box, but maybe that's the way it needs to be. Shall I move on, or does anybody want to comment on the questions around the third-party investigator? Marie does.
Marie Taylor, board member. We talked about this when we were deciding whether we could go this far in putting this in the ordinance. And again, that was in the category of unfunded mandate. And we knew that, and we put it in knowing that that's the direction we would like to have happen. And we know that it's not within our purview to hire that person, to decide on the qualifications or how that would fit into the structure, because that would rest with the city manager. So I think we came down on wanting it in there and leaving it to the city commission to decide whether they thought it was appropriate, since we're just advisory.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I'm remembering, and I think I brought some of that up. We talked about an ombudsman or something, you know, with regard to that. And I agree with you, Marie. I think I feel comfortable leaving it to the city commission to maybe define that part. But I also, you know, I read through the summary of responses quite often, and you know, I mean, there are some, again, the investment of response of folks who are very knowledgeable and took some time to understand the issue, and the ordinance itself was pretty clear in the dynamic and the arrangement, like the city manager has a skin in the game, you know, all those comments. I mean, those are all a variety of different viewpoints that are legitimate, you know. So anyway, I like what you said, Marie, because I don't remember how we resolved it at the time to come to where we did in the ordinance.
Well, I think we just decided to live with the unfunded mandate because
Yeah,
we needed some
think
other place to go other than,
Yeah.
well, we just disagree.
Right, and I guess a larger way to address that is just to make sure it's vetted in a way that has checks and balances that guarantee fairness and justice through the process.
Well, this is one of those things where we're not going to know,
Yeah,
you know, until we've lived with this for a while and we've seen how it works.
right.
So shall I move on? Does anybody else want to? Okay, I'm moving on. Second, from question 5, this comes back to the OPA investigations, and people were concerned about a lack of transparency there. I mean, there are people out there who don't trust the CPRB, and there are people out there who don't trust the police department. This comes from a point of view that the OPA has a conflict of interest in investigating community member complaints against police officers. And so the suggestion was made by a number of people, not that it matters, we can just say a suggestion was made that the CPRB should have a role to play in those investigations. Maybe have a representative work with or observe OPA in the process. I don't know how I don't know anything about the logistics of that, whether that's practical or feasible at all, or but it seems to me a legitimate concern that there is no transparency around those investigations, and what we get is we get an investigative file. It's a done deal at that point. So I thought it was an interesting idea that the CPRB might play some role there.
On page 4, right, Jane?
Pardon me?
That was on page 4, is that correct?
Of what?
Of the document?
I don't know. I made some
Or
notes.
you said several notes. Okay, I'm sorry.
You don't have access to
Okay.
that. These are my notes about what the policy
Sure.
implications are, the
Okay.
ordinance implications. Any thoughts about
Marie?
CPRB having a role to play?
Yeah.
Board member Marie Taylor, I think we discussed this with the city attorney about how much of a role we could play in the actual investigation. So I think we should put this on the list of questions back to them on the analysis to tell us what the extent of of a role we could play in that process? What's our limit? And that would help us figure out whether we could change the ordinance to play a more active role.
Good.
Okay,
I'm good
yeah,
with that.
that's good.
Okay, it's on my list. Brandon, I hope that's on your list too. Thank you. And then I have one more, and this is about, and this one is actually a follow-up on our district attorney, Suzanne Valdez's concern, and it came up again in the survey. I was happy to see that because I met with Suzanne by Zoom to talk about her concern that there could be competing investigations and that an investigation that we had requested, you know, the third-party investigator we requested of the city manager might be conducting something that was in fact referred to the DA for criminal investigation. And that those parallel investigations were sort of untenable, and that the third-party investigation that we might request would interfere with and undermine the criminal investigation of anything that went to the DA's office. So I can't say that I understand all that. I certainly believe her, and I think any complaint that was referred to the DA's office is already in pretty good hands there. And so it's my view that we need to add a statement to the ordinance that any complaint referred to the DA's office for criminal investigation will not be reviewed by the CPRB, that's just out of our hands once it goes to the DA's office.
Board Member Gibson, can you repeat that last part just one more time?
Yes, I think
The
that
revision of the ordinance.
you mean about what we need to add to the ordinance?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, this is my view, but I will say that Suzanne Valdez thinks that this is what we need to do. Not that it's her call, it's our call. But I think that we need to add the statement that any complaint referred by the, I guess probably OPA or the police department to the DA's office for criminal investigation will not be reviewed by the CPRB. So that we don't have those parallel complaints. We don't have the possibility that a third-party investigator would somehow undermine the DA's investigation. Does that make any sense? Marie?
So Marie Taylor, board member, I think we need to talk to our own city council on this point, because I think we did discuss how, and I can't remember the details about how the process works when there already is some sort of relationship between the OPA complaints and district attorney investigations already. And so I can't remember the details on that. So I'm not sure that there's going to be an inconsistency. It may be that we never get to those. I think there may be some sort of like abatement or some sort of like suspension on the OPA side. I'm not sure. I cannot remember the details, but I know it did come up in discussion that was separate from our role when we were just being told about how the process works. So I think we just have to circle back and look at that question again.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good idea to take it to the staff. But I also, you have memories of discussions that I don't recall. So we'll just call it my dementia or something. But the problem is that our ordinance at the moment says that we will review all complaints. And in this case, when we have, there are some cases OPA doesn't investigate, they immediately turn them over to somebody else to investigate. And sometimes that's the DA's office. So I'm delighted to turn this over to the staff and ask them to look at this and help us with it, because I don't think that we want to be at odds with the judicial system. We want to be, supportive of letting that system work properly. So thank you, Marie. I appreciate that. And that's all I've got on number 5.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, if not, we'll move on to 6. Membership?
Well, I'm afraid that's me again.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, this is, oh, no, please. I don't mind that at all. I found this to be a really interesting experience and I enjoyed it. So please don't say that. So this one is about how well the requirements would help the CPRB reflect community diversity. Unfortunately, when we wrote the setup for the question, we left out this little line that comes up in the paragraph above under 2505 that says that the mayor and the governing body will appoint, I can't remember the exact words, board members who reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of the community. It's something just like that. And so we didn't put that in the setup. And so there were people who did not go back and read the ordinance and were asking interesting questions about what we meant by diversity. But they made some cogent points. Some of these folks made some really cogent points about that. And so the first, I would say that there are three, and they are about diversity, about criminal background, and about conflict of interest. And the last two are closely related. So let me talk about diversity really quickly. People asked which community characteristics should be represented on the CPRB, even though right now the mayor and the governing body, it says that they should look for racial and ethnic composition of the community and try to reflect that. One thing, it doesn't say anything about the distribution of those categories, and that's probably a really good thing. I actually did the math on that using the 2019 census of Lawrence, and we'd have to have, in order to actually represent the distribution of racial and ethnic diversity in the community, we'd have to have a board of 50 people. And I think that's a little unwieldy, frankly. So I don't think that's going to happen. But it does mean we have some things to consider about the composition of the board and relying on racial and ethnic diversity. And the first is, or the second one is that the racial and ethnic diversity don't describe very much of the diversity of the community. They are important elements of the diversity in the community, but the town is diverse with regard to a number of other characteristics like gender and sexual orientation, religion, age, ability, income, housing status, occupation, what kind of car you own, whether you've been to the dentist in the last 6 months. There's all kinds of diversity that we could think about. And some of these categories are more salient than others with regard to community interactions and a healthy relationship with the Lawrence Police Department. So we already know, I believe we all agree, I believe that the racial and ethnic composition are key elements here that contribute to the questions of community police department relationships. But there are other categories that are important as well, and sexual orientation is one that came up in the study that was thrown out because of the methodology in it. But it did come up as a group of people in Lawrence. The LGBTQIA community said that they felt that they were not treated well by the police department, and it was a bad methodology, no question about that. But it does suggest that racial and ethnic diversity might not be the only things that we need to be thinking about when it comes to the composition of the board. And then another point is that even if we could produce this was a really interesting point to me. Even if we could produce a board that was representative of the racial and ethnic composition of Lawrence, and maybe some of these other diverse characteristics, there really is no empirical reason to assume that these categories have anything to do with the fairness or impartiality of the board. That is to say, that a person who doesn't fall into some stereotyped category is perfectly capable of rendering an impartial decision. And yet, we might have assumed when we chose racial and ethnic diversity that people who don't fit these categories won't be fair and impartial. So the questions that I think that people have raised around diversity are, should we add other categories to the diversity of residents that the mayor should try to represent in their appointments to the board? Or should we change the wording to say something like the mayor and the governing body shall include community members who reflect the diversity of the community, which is broad and open? Or should we leave it as is with its focus on racial and ethnic diversity and no reference to distribution, of course, which is inevitable, that has to be the case. So this is the question of qualifications for the board and the role that diversity should play in appointments to the board. Marie.
Board Member Marie Taylor, we keep calling on the same people because it's not all of us here. So I just want you to okay. So a couple of points. I think that we have to recall that the structure of the board's review was limited to the racial profiling bias-based policing. So the language, we inherited this language and we just didn't change it. So I think that when we opened up the description of all the different kinds of diverse characteristics that when we defined beyond just sort of like a race or ethnicity based concerns, we didn't also expand this section of who we'd be looking for on this board. So I think it makes sense to also expand that definition to at least reflect what we had, all the work we initially did to kind of expand those categories to begin with. So that's something we should talk about as in terms of a potential revision, and then keep it as without any restrictions on like meeting certain quotas, so to say, right? I don't think that was the point. It's more to have these as leaving it to the city commission to use their good judgment to appoint a board that over time reflects the community, since it's not a moving target. I mean, excuse me, it is a moving target.
Yeah.
What our demographics are from year to year or census to census, right? So I think it can accommodate that. We just didn't write that in when we were doing this revision. So we should do that. And then I think we have to also think about the other aspects of this membership question on that criminal background check. So we can talk about that as well.
I do have some things on that, if you don't mind my jumping in there on criminal. Does anybody else want to speak to the question about diversity? I think you said it well, Marie. Sanjay.
Yeah.
Sanjay Mishra, board members, on racial diversity, I hear what Marie is saying, that we need to leave it to the city commission. But I'm thinking, can we put some guardrails on it? So that, who knows, if there is a mayor who thinks very differently than we do, or the community that should not be, they will not be the mayor. But so to say that at least half or more than half the members should be represented from quote unquote minority communities.
Can we include that in the discussion that we'll agree to have? Sanjay, is that okay? I put it on my list.
Yeah.
Guardrails. I put guardrails on my list. Okay.
Okay, guardrails and the criminal background conversation too, Marie, to affirm that.
Coming up on that.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Because the second element on, is it okay if I move on?
Yes.
To criminal background. Respondents expressed concern that criminal background checks and conflicts of interest could work as disincentives to application for board members. So they ask a number of questions about that, like if I had a DUI 10 years ago, does that mean that I can't be on the board? They could also be used to exclude those who have criminal records or direct or indirect experience with the Lawrence Police Department or with any police department. That comes back to conflict of interest as well. Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income residents are seen to be disproportionately represented in these categories of those who have criminal records or direct and indirect experience with the Lawrence Police Department. So depending on definition and application, respondents noted that criminal background checks and the conflict of interest provision could undermine the goal of creating a CPRB that reflects community characteristics. I can see that. Having people on the board, someone else pointed out, interestingly, that having people on the board with personal experience and knowledge of the Lawrence Police Department and justice system could actually benefit the board. So the questions are, what kinds of information should be disqualifying in these background checks, if we're going to have them, and I assume we're going to have them. I think the city probably requires that, but we can ask Brandon about that. Should the amount of time since a criminal offense matter, and what should the standard be for passing the background check? Those are questions that were asked by the respondents on that subject. Marie.
Board member Marie Taylor. So as you all know, we did a lot of work to limit what was already contained in terms of what we saw as restrictions on people based on past criminal history. And I think that we had already eliminated a lot of the language that really would have been really problematic to the people who complained about this on the survey. If they had reviewed the original law, or I should say the current law as it is now, they would probably be shocked. So I think that we had got it down to just the need for the background check was related to current, if they were pending criminal issues, right? And then that's where we saw that there could be a conflict of interest. Someone can remind me if that's corrected. Let me look at it. But it seems like we had got it down to having less of an impact, except for things that would really generate a conflict of interest because there was, say, like a pending criminal matter. Is that everyone's understanding?
It says that it just says that that anybody on the board is going to have to submit to a criminal background check. It doesn't say, it doesn't answer these questions about what kinds of information would be disqualifying, or amount of time since the offense was committed, or any standards for passing a background check. And those are the main issues. So all it says is that all of us would submit.
Right. Board Member Taylor.
Okay, Board Member Marie Taylor. So what we've got it down to, the only thing I could see that the only reason to have a criminal background check was to satisfy this qualification under 12506, have no pending criminal charges. No pending. So I think then there's a disconnect if we don't say that's the reason why we were having a criminal background check. It's not to be used to just exclude people. It could be if it's misused. Yes.
Well, I
Stephanie?
think you're right that there's a disconnect, and we need to address that.
Board Member Littleton?
And this board member, Stephanie Littleton, I was just going to speak to that. Yeah, we talked to city staff at length about this and really whittled this down quite a bit just to that pending. So.
Okay. Board Member Gibson?
Board Member Gibson, but that means, I mean, here, when it just says everybody submits to one, that doesn't mean that the background check can't
going to
be
disqualify
inclusive of many other kinds of criminal records. I think that it's reasonable to ask us to be more explicit. If we're going to have a criminal background check, what are the expectations there? And furthermore, the question about that we answered above about no pending criminal charges, that's about conflict of interest, not about the background check, the criminal background check. So conflict of interest is related, but it doesn't answer this. I don't think it answers this question. I think this is one we're going to need to talk to staff about again.
Yeah, I agree. Board Member Taylor?
So Board Member Marie Taylor, a way to perhaps reach the same results is if we have an application for the board that makes people warrant and represent that they don't have any pending charges, and then there's nothing stopping the city commission or the mayor who's doing to check to see. I mean, it's public record if there's a pending criminal charge. They could just do their own due diligence, and then you wouldn't have to make everyone submit a background check. And maybe you could make the same sort of investigation on the qualifications of the candidate based on their representation.
Yeah.
Marie Taylor, board member, that's just an idea.
Yeah. Board Member Mishra.
Board Member Sanjay Mishra. So I remember this discussion, and we wanted to make it as loose as possible so people with prior records were not siphoned off and they were also eligible to come. But as I'm hearing this, something comes to mind is, does the gravity of prior offense not matter completely?
A number of people asked that. Some people
Yeah.
said felons should
Felony,
not be allowed
right.
to serve. But
So
others said-
my law degree, I don't have a law degree, so I would defer to the city lawyer or the resident consultant lawyer to say if it is type 1 or type 2 or level 1, level 2, level 3 offense, and then they can grade it up. That would help, because you wouldn't want somebody who is, yes.
Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Murray Taylor. So when I was looking at other boards and how they were structured, some boards had this as a requirement, some sort of no felons allowed. Then there were other boards that were silent and did not use this as a disqualification. I did notice that the city of Dallas used to have this as a requirement, and they removed it from all of their city boards. And I thought that was a step forward.
Okay. Clearly, this is something we need to revisit when we address the ordinance. Would that be fair to say? And it gives us a lot of good information to continue a conversation about that. Okay, Jane, is there anything else?
One more, and that's on conflict of interest. This is Jane Gibson, board member. On conflict of interest, we have the issue of no pending criminal charges, but we also have questions from respondents about what will constitute a conflict of interest. It is very open, very undefined in our ordinance. So they ask which kinds of relationships, this is my boiling down of a lot of different comments, which kinds of relationships, opinions, or experience constitute conflicts of interest. So for example, I have a brother-in-law who is a police officer. Does that disqualify me? Because somebody would think I am biased in favor of the police. Or Stephanie is a former police officer. Should she be disqualified because maybe she has an axe to grind against the police? So, or, you know, people who, there were some interesting examples, like people who have spoken out against the police. Or should those people be disqualified for their vocal opinions? So it is pretty broad and pretty open to leave conflict of interest. And, you know, we might decide that we want to leave that in the hands of the mayor and the governing body, but we also might want to think about that a little more.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Anything else, Jane?
No, that's it for 5. Can I add that to our list to talk about a little more?
Absolutely, please. Okay, I think we're ready for 7 now.
Board Member Marie Taylor, this was the catch-all. So
It was.
it was hard to create a summary. So unless a comment was very redundant of another comment, I included them all because I thought they all stood on their own. But when I read through them, they seem to have made these same comments throughout all of the, they just repeated how they felt on other, all the sections. Same sorts of sentiments came up. And so I don't think they present us with anything that's specific to an ordinance revision that we would have to consider. They were just sentiments that I think, if anything, we would want to make sure Citygate had a copy of,
Back.
which they did. So which we Brendan confirmed. So I think if anything, we just have a sense of how the extremes on both sides of the issues, whether we should even exist as a board versus we're doing a great job and keep going forward. So there was no real way to have there was no consensus.
Right.
But I'm very glad that everyone who took the survey took the time to do that and give their comments to us, and I'm glad that it was one of the more responsive activities on that Lawrence surveys.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really pleased with that. So they all kind of stand on their own, but I'm glad that they took the survey.
Yeah, me too. I think that, again, thank you, Marie. Any questions or follow-up to Marie? Yeah, I think this, all the work that everyone's done, this is great. And this was I want to step back and thank the group in planning the communication plan as you did, and the resources from the city that helped with this, because I think, yeah, it was very successful, and really, really good feedback and good engagement from our citizens, really. So yay. Okay, so we've got some follow-up work to do. It looks like we have some time, as Brandon said, to receive some feedback from the Citygate folks. So we've got a May 13th is our next proposed meeting, where we can roll up our sleeves and address maybe the 5 to 6 follow-up issues that we've identified this evening. I think they're around that many, and take a very hearty look at the ordinance with regard to those. Is that, would everyone feel comfortable next steps with that? Jane?
Jane Gibson, board member. I'd like to know if Tony and Randy will be with us, because we need them.
Yeah.
Brandon, can you tell us if Tony and Randy will be with us at the May 13th meeting? Or if we need to reschedule it for the week after to make it a full month from now, that would be even better. But whenever we can get them, we need them with us.
This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. So would the request of the board be for legal counsel to be present to speak specifically about these questions that were raised tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, because they, what we want to avoid is putting them in a position where they're going to be asked to provide legal counsel, on the fly, just based on whatever questions may come up. So I will provide this to City Attorney Tony Wheeler, the feedback from this evening, and ask her to take a look at it and give us an ETA on when she could return her analysis, or the analysis of her staff, back to the board.
Thank you. That'd be terrific.
Okay, so we'll plan on following up on the 13th then. Yeah.
So, may I? Tanya?
Sanjay?
Yeah, Sanjay Mishra, board member. So as we plan the next meeting, I know this is important because this gets the ordinance in place, but I think what we seem to be getting away from is some of our training and understanding of the process. And I want to draw our attention to that also, to see how much time we budget to this and to the training. So I would propose that we split into an hour each and see if we can, if we think we need some training, to bring an hour of training up.
Are you suggesting that we have a conversation of the type of training and propose the training that we need to prepare for?
If that's the first place, I thought the citizens have suggested some of the things that we need to know, and we have been asking for some of those. So maybe an hour, split it into two, so that we keep getting updated on the other side also. Otherwise, we'll be playing catch up.
Okay. Any response, comments? Jane?
Board member Jane Gibson. Sanjay, I really appreciate your frustration, about the training issues, which, I have come up a number of times. At the same time, I wonder, I guess I find it frustrating to have a meeting that has a training in it and then tries to get this other business done. And what that has meant all along is that we've not been able to move this ordinance forward. And I know that we're still going to be hearing from Citygate, and that there are other reasons we'll be adjusting this ordinance. But I think if we're going to have a training, I think it should be a meeting devoted to the training, and not try to have a meeting that is so compressed with so many agenda items that we can't get them done. We can't. I guess for me, Sanjay, I want to get the ordinance done. So for me, it's not to say that training is not a priority. I'm totally on board with you on that, Sanjay. But I'd like to get the ordinance done. And if everybody wants to do a training, then I'm in. Let's just not try to do a training and fix the ordinance all in one night.
Mhm. I think we could put it on the agenda to talk about it and have maybe a better timeline with regard to our next two meetings and in concluding our work here on the ordinance and how to fold in the feedback or the recommendations from Citygate. And you said that might be in June, Brandon?
Assistant City Manager.
Brendan McGuire, yes, I would expect to have a draft in hand in time for the June meeting.
Does that mean a presentation as well?
Assistant City Manager Brendan McGuire. I'm not sure if the consultant will be ready to present to the board. I would assume so, but I will need to follow up with the consultant on their specific, their ability to do that at the June Police Review Board meeting. Additionally, the report out will include some public engagement opportunities as we've envisioned it so far, but typically when a consultant produces a report, they present that, like a report like this, they present that report to the City Commission. So we need to just kind of think about the mechanics of that. So it may be more appropriate instead for the consultant to present the report to the City Commission, and the Police Review Board members can be on that same meeting, view that meeting,
Okay.
and then maybe have follow-up discussion, and maybe we can get a member of the consultant team to join the board meeting after that, as opposed to presenting the whole report. So I'll think through that a little bit.
We might have a better timeline then by May 13th?
Yes.
Okay. And so we can talk about some training options and some date options on that. Sanjay?
So I don't want to cram our agenda, but I'm looking at May and June being very busy months because we need to produce our annual report also, Madam Chair. So I would at least start work on that so that we can revise it and finalize it in our June meeting. Because, right, that's June 31st is when we need to put out our report.
I don't have the calendar right in front of me. Brandon, do you know?
It says one of the ordinance will say we need to put out a report to.
Yeah.
But our
Sorry.
Assistant City Manager Brendan McGuire, Tanya, are you talking about you're not aware of the schedule beyond?
Well, yeah. Are we going to do a prep or a draft of the report in June for a July
Submission.
to issue? In July.
Dave, are you talking about our report?
Yeah.
Our report is due to the state by the end of July. I thought you were referring to the review board's report, so it should be available. Now let me think about this for a second. I apologize. We're reporting. Go ahead.
Sorry, Assistant City Manager Brendan McGuire, and that was Lieutenant Dave Arns. You're talking about the department's report to
He's talking
the Attorney General.
No, Sanjay, go ahead.
No, I was talking about our report that we have to give to the City Commission, the board's report to the City Commission. We put out an annual report, right? That's what we are wanting to do. Yes, no.
Are you
Is this
talking
under
about
the
what we've proposed in the ordinance?
Yes.
And we have done that every year. We have done that every year.
It says in the ordinance that we do it after July 31st, Tanya.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And we added that to this ordinance. It has not been, did we add it?
That's not in the current ordinance? Oh, crap.
No,
I don't think it is.
But we have been delivering a report every year.
Yes.
Why were we doing that?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Captain McKinley has.
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire, yes, there is a provision in the current ordinance that does say the board will report to the city commission from time to time regarding its activities, including an annual report to be presented to the city commission at the first regularly scheduled Lawrence City Commission meeting following July 31st each year. So that would be the first meeting in August.
Right, and historically, the city manager and the city attorney have assisted in generating that, right? And that gives us a chance to review it in July then, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you, sorry. I'm thinking of another report. Okay, so let's bring our calendars and look very seriously. Sanjay, seriously, in working on this ordinance, we may not have an opportunity for training until August. Does that sound reasonable? But we're committed to it.
Whatever the board decides, I'm with it. I'm one member.
Okay.
But Captain McKinley had his hand up. So
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, Captain McKinley.
I won't belabor this point, but just for some background, that date of July 31st is based on that when that bias-based policing report is due to the state.
To the state, the Attorney General's office, right?
You're correct. And so that's why that date was put in there.
Yeah.
You may or may not want to consider aligning an annual report with the city's annual reports and the timing in which the police department and the rest of the city produce those annual reports so that it's a calendar year. But that's just a suggestion. Again, that date was in there because that was the way the state required the reporting of the bias-based policing report. It was due after June. It closes on June 30th each year, and it's required to be reported out formally within 1 month's time after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so at our next meeting, then we will we'll look at our calendars and proceed forward with our responsibilities and in continuing our work on the ordinance, awaiting some documents and perhaps a report from Citygate, and preparing the report, and then thinking, and in the meantime, talking about, and I'd like to reserve a little time on the agenda just to talk about the topics that we want to focus on with regard to training. So we can work with the staff to get that planned well in advance. Does that sound good? Board Member Gibson and Taylor?
Board Member Jane Gibson, I agree, it sounds good. I'd just like for us to keep on our radar here that the goal is to take this ordinance as it's revised and cleaned up to the City Commission.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what to expect in this Citygate report, how it will impact, the decisions that we make to revise the ordinance further. It might have a significant impact and we might be doing a lot more work on it, or it might not be very much and we might be able to get it there. So I would just like us not to forget that that's where we're headed here, is to try to get us an ordinance that makes our work meaningful and helpful to this community.
Absolutely, and it's foundational work and sustainability for sure. Board Member Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, I was just going to add in on the training. If Captain McKinley would also be providing some suggestions of ways that would work well for the department to offer those trainings, like if they've got something that would be very an efficient way to do that, and suggested topics that align with the training that they may already have in mind or planned for their office.
Very good, thank you. Concur. All right, anything else? Board Member Gibson?
Board Member Jane Gibson, I move we adjourn.
Okay, is there a second? I see Steph.
Board
We're stuck a little tonight. I just wanted to make one point real quick. I kind of was waiting to come back to the minutes from our last board meeting. You know how we all provided feedback about the LPD's website. Has anybody had an opportunity to go back in and look at it lately? To see the updates? Okay, so they've made some really nice updates.
Okay.
Per our recommendations. So anyway, if you get a chance, I just say go out and look at it.
Absolutely.
They've added a number of things. I think the flow chart suggestion is still outstanding. And then of course, developing educational brochure is probably part with us as well, but they did do some things that looks really good. So I just wanted to let everybody know. So thank you to the police department.
Very good. So acknowledged.
Very much.
Thank you.
Looks good.
Very good. We've got a motion on the floor. Do we need a second? Board Member Taylor?
Board Member Marie Taylor, we do have a member of the public, so do we need to call for public comment on this item? Or did that individual sign up for it? I just want to make sure before we adjourn, we're not missing any public comment requests.
Do we open it up for final public comments?
Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. I think Board Member Taylor is referring to the second regular agenda item. It was not opened up for public comment after the board's discussion.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, who's the second? Sanjay.
Sanjay, you second it?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor, yay. All those opposed, nay. Board Member Littleton.
Board Member Littleton, yay.
Gibson.
Board Member Gibson, yay.
Taylor.
Board Member Marie Taylor, yay.
Board Member Mishra.
Board members Mishra, yes.
Very good. Salvini, yes. And we are unanimously adjourned.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
everyone. Thank you so much for all your work again.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks.